So you know it's not a crime to be fascinated by all things criminal. And if you do like delving into the underworld, why not join us for a special live show on March 27th at the Cork Opera House. We'll be talking about the making of a cartel and all the wild and crazy stories that happened along the way. So why not join us for this special live show? Tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie.
Brad, you're a national crime columnist for the Toronto Sun and author of Inside the Mind of the Golden State Killer. Obviously, this case was an unidentified serial killer case that remained unsolved in America for 42 years. But can you take us back in time to the 1970s in California and kind of give us a potted history of the crimes committed by the Golden State Killer?
Sure. Joseph D'Angelo was originally from upstate, a small town in upstate New York called Bath. Now he was a Vietnam veteran, but he wasn't running around the jungle shooting an M16 as he often told people. He was on a ship 20 miles off the coast. So a bit of a fabulous that way, but he desperately wants to be a cop after he gets out of Vietnam, and he goes to university. He desperately wants to be a cop, and he gets hired by a small town in Northern California called Exeter. He does just run of the mill copper stuff there, and then he moves to Aurora, California, closer to kind of an outer suburb of Sacramento, the state capital. And at some point, he, I don't know whether he just started pushing things. He would, break into people's houses and kind of prowl and look into windows and, jump over backyards and whatnot. And, he would steal souvenirs, whether it was, undergarments or ties or whatever. And so he continues doing this for quite a long time. Now he's very clever, and he's getting away with this, and, but because, this is, in his, guise as the Visalia ransacker, one of the early goings of his thing. And then but then he's breaking in, he's stealing the odd thing. And then on September 11th, 1975, he's a cop, but he does a break-in. The owner, Professor Claude Snelling of the house, and his daughter, whether D'Angelo was after the daughter or the house or whatever, he gets chased by Claude Snelling and turns around and shoots him dead on the street. Mm-hmm. Now he has a murder. He kicked the daughter 3 times in the face as well. So, I mean, this is not a pleasant guy. And but instead of where you and I would say, thank Christ I got away with that one, I'm never going to do anything that stupid again, he's wired in such a way that he's going to go and he's going to do it again. Mm-hmm. He continues, his way. And he's starting to rape and, women in their homes and whatnot. And if their husbands or boyfriends or whatever are there, a part of his MO is that he wants to emasculate the man, mm-hmm. by basically saying, you're going to lie there, and if you move, I'm going to kill your girlfriend, right? While he would rape them. And so that, and he would taunt them, and that would be his sort of thing.
So I suppose, who was the first victim targeted by Joseph D'Angelo, and how did these murders get more sophisticated over time? In their initial stages, obviously, I know you touched on that they began as rape, and then, he kind of got more sophisticated in brawling people's partners and stuff like that. Can you kind of go into detail on that?
Yeah, he at this point, he had continued around Northern California. The first few murders, actually, Professor Snelling and this couple in February 1978. Now, these are randos. These are, I don't want to get caught, and I'll kill them if I have to get away. So in February 1978, in the Sacramento area, he shoots and kills Brian and Katie Maggiore. Now, he was just an Air Force guy. They weren't targeted, but they saw D'Angelo zipping between backyards and whatnot, and they yelled at him, and nothing happened. Then he came back out and he shot Brian Maggiore, and she ran, and he chased her down and shot her twice in the head. So those first three murders are just sort of by chance that these people are at the wrong place at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing, and D'Angelo ramps it up. But he's got a problem. He's got a problem because, with the East, he becomes also known as the East Bay rapist. So he's breaking into houses, committing rapes and whatnot. The cops and cuckolding the husbands. Cops aren't tying this together. They don't know right now. They don't know the Visalia ransacker is the East area rapist. So what D'Angelo does is now you're getting into targeting. He goes on the road to Southern California, hundreds of miles away. The first stop is the Santa Barbara area. And he goes down there and he starts scouting the neighborhood, looking for escapes, where he can get to his car 3 blocks over, or, through a path, through a park or whatever, and then getting onto the freeway and back up north after he's done it. Now he's compelled to kill. The first 2 people he murdered in a place called Goleta, which is near Santa Barbara, were Deborah Manning and Robert Offerman. Offerman was a surgeon, and they figured out later that he had been scouting them, not specifically them, but looking for targets in that particular area. So, he murders them. Then 3 months later, the killing is ramping up in Ventura County, which is one county down from Santa Barbara. He, kills Lyman and Charlene Smith. Charlene Smith was bound and raped. The view on that is that he had seen her at a local mall where she worked and was attracted to her. Now, that's really the first example of, specifically targeting someone.
Mm-hmm. So it kind of took a while for, I suppose, authorities to link these kind of couple of aliases together, the East Area Rapist and the Night Stalker together. Can you tell me a bit about that and how authorities actually ended up linking all of these to one individual?
Sure. Well, I guess the first part of this, though, is the problem at the time. And I'd written about this actually for a story of the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, but it was that Southern California, that area, not as bad in Northern California, there is a slew of different police forces, and they're all interconnected by freeways. The area is completely freeway. So you could theoretically snatch a person off the street in one, kill them in another, and dump them in a third. So that gets to whose responsibility is this, right? I think at that time in Los Angeles, anyways, there was 5 different serial killers operating at the time. It was, serial killer central. None of the cops from any of the other police services barely talked to each other. They were very guarded of their information. And of course, there was none of the modern conveniences like, DNA, cell phone pinging, CCTV. All these things were out there. So this was for a homicidal maniac. This was a playground.
Mm. Mm-hmm. And what was the extent of the police investigation to find this guy? We know obviously that, DNA databases and stuff like that came later, but I suppose how were the police attempting to track down this guy? Obviously it was pandemonium, all of these murderous sprees happening.
Sure, it was they started out with old-fashioned shoe leather and whatnot, and which it wasn't, going, as we've seen in numerous cases, it wasn't going to be enough. It wasn't that the police didn't do their due diligence. It was more a matter of the times, we're against them, and they were against, quite frankly, a very sophisticated predator. So they did all the due diligence, but it doesn't, till years later, decades later, after, the last victim, Janelle Cruz, who was, murdered in 1986, she was the last victim. Years after, one cop calls another cop and says, hey, I got this thing, and, it sounds a little bit like that. And so then, you're starting to see, patterns come together. And, the writer Michelle McNamara really did the world a service by blowing this story up in her, first in Los Angeles Magazine and then in the book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark. Mm. And just about all these, crazy crimes that no one was putting together. And certainly, there's nothing going on. And at this point, too, he stopped. Janelle Cruz, who was, I think, 17 or 18 when she raped and murdered at her house south of Los Angeles. So, he's traveling hundreds of miles to kill. Then in 1986, boom, that's it. Mm. He's done. Mm-hmm. And with some serial killers, they age out. So their circumstances change. The BTK killer, Dennis Rader, he said, he went on I think a 10-year hiatus from killing, and he later said that the reason was because he had kids. He was too busy, taking kids to baseball games and things like that. He didn't have time to go kill people, right? To indulge his hobby. And around the time that Janelle Cruz is murdered, after that, D'Angelo has children now, and from all stretches, he's actually a pretty good father. He's a very devoted father. And all of a sudden, the killing stops. However, he is still one of the earmarks of Joseph D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, was that he would taunt his victims or the survivors of the victims years after. It would be, a phone call, with a sinister laugh or, different things like that. You should have seen her. And so, yeah, he kept, so he kept his hand in that way. But even at that, the phone calls, I think, stopped 7 years later, and then nothing. And the police hadn't even figured out at that point, when he'd stopped making his phone calls, that these murders hundreds of miles away in Northern California, around Sacramento and that area, were connected to these murders in Santa Barbara, in Ventura County, and in Orange County, south of Los Angeles. I mean, that's a long way to go. I mean, so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Totally. And we know Joseph D'Angelo took a 5-year hiatus from murdering people. I think it was after Cherry Domingo and Gregory Sanchez.
That's correct. He took a hiatus then as well. So, and you know, that I think the turning it on and turning it off also may have thrown cops off from you know, saying, "Oh yeah, that's the guy. Remember that." And
well, presumably it wasn't kind of, I suppose, top of their radar because he seemingly had, you know, kind of diminished. But it wasn't until 32 years later that the individual responsible was kind of tracked down, of course. How did they actually find Joseph D'Angelo? How did they link him to this?
Well, they figured out that from just regular DNA, that it was the same killer because they had the data banks up by that same killer sort of stuff. But it would be, in some of these instances, it would be like a needle in a haystack trying to find them, Chloe, like up here in Canada, using the same method they used to get the Golden State Killer. A cop I know who's the head of the cold case unit in Toronto, Steve Smith, and he's, you know, one of the most famous guys for using this technology. They got a guy who was responsible for 2 separate murders in 1983, and he told me if it hadn't been for genetic genealogy, it would have been 1 in 10 million to find him. Now you're going to ask me, what's genetic genealogy?
Well,
Come on.
No, I'm not. No. So obviously for those who don't know genetic genealogy, it's kind of like those 23andMe tests, isn't it? Where you are going back to trace your family history and you take a swab of your DNA and you send it off and you get back any potential hits or leads on your relations.
It doesn't say Chloe McPolin is the killer. It doesn't say that. But what it does say is that somebody in Chloe McPolin's broader family is a killer. And so then police have to, you know, still do the old-fashioned work, but it's a shortcut. And they eliminate who the killer is. Now, they found a distant cousin of D'Angelo, and after, you know, eliminating, this was, you know, I think 2016, they started going back and eliminating his relatives until they found their guy.
And when they did find their guy, it wasn't until 2020 that the actual trial took place. So what year was that?
They found him in 2018, but the trial, it was one of the difficulties in writing the book was because there was no trial. So there were no psychiatric reports. There were no childhood friends saying Joe's all right. I mean, he's a pretty grumpy looking guy. But there were neighbors, you know, that were afraid of him, that didn't like him and whatnot. And there were other neighbors that just thought, hey, he's a grumpy old guy. You know, he jokes and, you know, he apologizes when he yells and screams at us. So, I mean, but, you know, it was difficult, you know, putting it together because there was so little about him. Even his family, back in Bath, New York, which is southeast of Buffalo, they were a blip there. Nobody remembered them. They were also from, you know, that area, Watkins Glen, and nobody remembered them. They were just like a blip. And you start going with your papers at the time, and they're a blip. His parents were in a car accident in 1940. I mean, that's really the extent of it.
So we don't really have a sense of what kind of individual Joseph D'Angelo actually really was, per se. How did you go about kind of, I suppose, for the book, how did you go about kind of getting those sources and bits and pieces together?
I started at the beginning back in Bath, New York, and tried to find out about the family going from there. And from the sounds of things, it wasn't a normal family life, particularly if we think of post-war 1950s white picket fence America sort of a deal, and Leave It to Beaver and that sort of stuff. It wasn't. His dad was in the Air Force, and they lived in Germany for a while. Now, there's one of the things that may have been, and it has not been hammered into stone, is that that he'd witnessed his sister raped when she was 7 at a military base in West Germany at the time, and that may have had an effect on him. He seemed like a maladroit individual, somebody that you'd feel socially uncomfortable, around. And it doesn't look like there was a lot of friends or anything like that. And, obviously, being serial killers, a fairly solitary occupation.
Mm. And in 2020, Joseph D'Angelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder and pleaded guilty to 13 counts of kidnapping charges. What sentence did he receive?
Life. He pleaded guilty because he would have got the death penalty, or a sentence to the death penalty. I mean, it's not like California isn't quite like Texas to strap him down at every opportunity. But yeah, he did it. He pleaded guilty to escape a potential death penalty.
Mm. And obviously, Brad, this is a case that's obviously been extensively covered. There's a lot of books written, and it got a lot of media coverage. But why did you decide to write this book?
Well, for money, but I decided that there was, I was intrigued by D'Angelo and that era as well. What I also tried to do was I tried to build around the era, because the era was completely different, and as it's turned out, I've written books on John Wayne Gacy and Charles Manson as well, and it's kind of in the same sort of era, and you can see all these people, not so much with D'Angelo, but with the others, of all these very vulnerable, naive young people who think, wearing a flowered shirt and carrying beads is going to protect you from the monsters hiding in the shadows, and they don't. And so D'Angelo was, in a way, a man of his times. He'd served in the military, he came home, and it was a bright, post-war time. Now, I don't have the answer to those profound questions, but you got to think California, 1970s. Sounds like a lot of fun, but apparently not for Joseph James D'Angelo. Obviously, the man has serious demons. What makes him tick? There's the rape of the sister. There's the home that was a mess. I mean, his father left his mother, started a new family in Korea where he is in the military, and he named the kids the same names as D'Angelo and his siblings. Which is
God Almighty. I think as well, it's the fact he remained, undiscovered for so long as well. There's that air of kind of mystery surrounding it, and that we now know. And it was actually just like modern technology that kind of ironed it all out. But it's a very, very interesting case. The more I read up on it, it's really, really interesting. But Brad, your book, Inside the Mind of the Golden State Killer, is available now. Can you tell us where you can get it?
You can get it at Amazon. You can get it at Smith's. You can get it at any number of places online, your better bookstores. And,
Fantastic. And you have a Substack as well. It's Crime Scene USA. And I presume that's where you cover all things crime related to the US of A.
That's correct. I mean, I do a lot on older cases, unknown cases, and whatnot, and kind of try to put the reader there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Brad. Thanks for coming on.
Okay, Chloe.
Thank you.
You take care of yourself. Stay out of trouble.
Thank you.
If you are already a subscriber to crimeworld.com, you've probably binged on our 6-part deep dive into the life and the rise of the dapper Don Christy Kinahan. From the streets of Dublin to the head of a global cartel, what made and moulded the ambitious Kinahan? And where is he now as he runs from the law? For those of you who haven't joined us yet, here's a short extract from our exclusive series, which is just a click away. So we're going to do a rest here. We're going to start this tome, which is the sort of the life and crimes of Christy Kinahan Sr., who has to be the most fascinating individual in the entire sort of Kinahan cartel set. You know, he is an intriguing character, to say the least.
I think he's the most interesting of all the gangland criminals, really, if you see where he's come from and where he's ended up and how he's managed to navigate through all of those eras of organised crime. An incredible story. If he was involved in another arena of life, he'd be regarded as a kind of heroic businessman. But of course he's not. He's involved in a murderous cartel. But an incredible story.
And there's a little bit of intrigue and mystery to his background, which we're going to go into. Some of it is clear, and other bits, the stories that go around the mix, and you can never, like, for example, you know, some people would say he was a heroin addict. I know he did tell the courts at one point that he did that, but he did it for a reason. And the reason was he wanted a free education.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very interesting, the heroin addict, and maybe we'll come back to that.
We'll come back to it, because that is something that, you know, certainly some people close to him say that was never the case.
Yeah.
And those who are sort of, I suppose, become his enemies in more recent times would definitely say that, like it's a
stick to beat him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there's other little bits that are unusual. We'll start and we'll go through as much as we know factually, and then we'll also discuss the rumours. So he's born in 1957. He's 6 years older than Jerry the Monk Hutch, which just gives him a little bit of a, we can see where he is. He's what I would always say was into the bosom of a respectable middle-class family. Now, some intrigue comes with this. His father, to my understanding, was a taxi driver who worked the Gresham rank on Stephen's Green. And that would have been a good job.
That would have been a good job, a well-earning job. Certainly taxis, back in the day when taxis were protected. His father was also at some point registered, or I think on as a dairy farm manager, and also people would say he was involved in kind of street trading, not, as a lot of people in Dublin would have been over the years, involved in some stalls and selling in that sort of arena. So Christy Kinahan is raised in Cabra, but his birth cert says that he was born in England, in a place called Perryvale, near Ealing, I think, in London. So this is the late 1950s, when at that time in Irish history, there was high unemployment. A huge number of people left Ireland to go to England at times to get work. Many of them returned, but that would have been one of the big points of emigration, where young couples got married and went over there. Certainly Christy Kinahan wasn't raised in England, but he certainly does seem to have lived there at times. He's had connections to Birmingham and that sort of area, maybe all his life. So he's described, I suppose, as having a middle class upbringing.
Well, I suppose the first house that we can look upon that we know he was in as a child, and he was the only boy in a family of 3 girls, Denise, Maria and Sally Ann. The mother appears to run a B&B from what is a generous Edwardian house. Do you know the name of the road?
Charleville Road.
Charleville Road.
So, I mean, yeah, I know it well. I mean, I would have grown up very close to there. I mean, those houses are worth a huge amount of money. Now, like a lot of houses in that area, for example, those big houses on the North Circular Road, which aren't far away, there probably would have been times where you would have picked them up at a bargain price, but it would be at, very, very far away from some of the figures we've discussed. For example, the grinding poverty in which Jerry Hutch would have been born into. Certainly Christy Kinahan would have been raised in something that's now worth a huge amount of money, that home. And it's
would they have always been a middle class sort of a home? We're using that term very loosely here. That's part of East Cabra. Yeah.
Right now, if you walk through East Cabra now, you can't. There's organic coffee shops and all of that sort of stuff, and houses being sold for routinely close to $500,000. Like back in the 60s, it wouldn't have been so much like that, I think. And those houses, like a lot of places in sort of Stony Batter or somewhere like that, those houses wouldn't have been seen as posh houses.
Would a taxi driver's wage have bought that house?
Well, it would have. It would have. I mean, it would be far, far bigger than most houses in that area, and would have cost a lot of money. But I suppose it's a different context, and Cabra would have been different then. Christy Kinahan would have been growing up in the 60s, early 70s when he's a teenager, and Cabra at that stage would have been a lot kind of wilder, I suppose. Like a lot of areas, there was a lot of homes built at one stage, and young people grew up, and it certainly would be a far more settled area, just like places like Crumlin and Drimnagh have become far more settled as the time has gone on. So he would have been brought up in an area that I wouldn't describe as being a sort of upper middle class area. He would have been grown up in a working class area, in a big house in a working class area, really.
And it's the big house.
Yeah.
It's an impressive looking house. It always would have been. We do have some suggestion that the family originally lived in St. Teresa's Gardens.
Yeah.
To go from St. Teresa's Gardens to Cabra and to this Edwardian period property is a huge leap.
It is a huge leap, and people would have said to me, for example, that the connection between the Kavanagh and the Kinahan family, for example, has always been a bit.
Bomber Kavanagh's parents.
Bomber Kavanagh's parents would have known Christy Kinahan's dad. They would have been friendly. All those people have no involvement in crime. There's no suggestion of that, but that it would have been, I suppose, maybe not as straightforward as this is he's a middle class guy. It's somewhere along that line, I suppose. And like most Irish people have, the poverty is only one generation away, I suppose.
Well, he certainly had aspirations, and he was very smart. In school.
Though it is said, and it just shows you when somebody gets as big a news story as Christy Kinahan that his leaving cert results have been made public. Do you know that?
Didn't know that.
And maybe not made public, but the Sun did a story about how he actually failed his leaving.
Right.
So Christy Kinahan, look, there's no doubt about him being smart, but certainly that was said that he only passed 2 subjects. He would have gone to, it said went to Declan's in Cabra first and got expelled, and then went to O'Connell's in the North Inner City. Now, O'Connell's Christian Brothers School, probably one of the most famous schools in Dublin. My own father would have gone there. People would have got a scholarship, and it would have seemed to have been a really prestigious school. Past pupils would have included James Joyce, Pat Kenny, the broadcaster, former Taoiseach Sean Lamass, PJ Mara. Also, interestingly, and probably a relative contemporary of Christy Kinahan would have been Tony Gregory would have gone there, who would play a huge prominent role in the anti-drugs marches in the city. So he would have gone. He would have, again, that would have been sort of a prestigious school. But he seems to have not thrived. And then I think we get into a bit of a grey area when he leaves school.
But he excelled, apparently, at sport and at kickboxing.
Yes, and that was a thing that he kept up, I think, through all his life, one way or another. And obviously his sons would have a huge interest in boxing as well.
If you liked what you just heard, go to crimeworld.com now and subscribe for more ad-free listening, exclusive content, and the best crime stories around.